We are joined today by Dr. Lynette Reed, who comes from Texas in the USA and is a people and culture partner and an executive coach. Lynette has also written a book called Fixing the Problem, Making Changes in How You Deal with Challenges, and this can be found on Amazon and relates to topics such as employee engagement, corporate culture, diversity and inclusion, critical thinking, and even sustainability. Lynette will be talking to us around her work that she does with individuals and organisations in training and her courses and how she addresses these issues. Okay, Lynette, you are a people and culture partner and executive coach, and I think we had a very, very long chat, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago, and we could have gone forever. But obviously, being the podcast, we want to be able to focus on what's relevant. So it will be a bit shorter. But I think to start off with, it would be interesting for our listeners for you to explain how you've arrived at what you do and what journey you took to get there.
Well, I'll do the Reader's Digest condensed version of it,
Okay.
because I've been doing this for about 20 plus years, and I actually started in a very different place and then moved into this. I was actually I did speech pathology for a number of years, and a lot of the work that I was doing had to do with communication. How do we communicate more effectively with each other, things like that.
Yeah.
And then I went back and ended up getting my doctorate in a very odd field called spirituality, sustainability, and interreligious dialogue, which sounds like you would go more into a faith-based, but one of the things that I found with my work was that it was incredibly relevant when you're talking about spirituality, which I define as how do you connect with yourself, other people, and the world in business. And so I started meeting with a number of clients, and I just kind of have kept that going. And what I'm finding more and more, especially in our COVID times now, that people are really searching for ways that they can connect better with themselves and make their businesses more effective, because that's a big thing they're finding is that whenever you have all of those connections in place, your business works better, which I think that was one of the things we talked about.
Yeah, sure.
Whenever we met the last time.
Sure. So to put it another way, is that a role that sort of delves into, if you understand yourself more, you get to know your flaws, your good points, your bad points, and working and accepting or working on those? How does that sort of work?
Yeah. It's what ended up happening was I actually did a lot of research, and I came up with a model back when I was working on my dissertation that basically I found just over and over and over again that there were 3 things that if people did them would kind of help bring a sense of calm to the area, would keep people focused, it would keep them on track for where they wanted to go. And if they used that as their model for how they were going to kind of go through the day, whether it be a person or a team or an organization, that there would be, less conflict, more efficiency, and all of those things that companies are looking for. So that's kind of the path that I've been going with it.
No, excellent. And I think in terms of what you do, was there anything in particular that sort of inspired you to do what you're doing now, or was it just something that you fell into and there was an aha moment? Or
well, I wish I could say that yes, I had the whole thing planned, but it was completely serendipitous. I had no idea. Even when I did my doctorate, I was like, oh, that sounds like something I need to do. And so I went and did it with the support. I have I'm married with kids, and they all supported me doing it, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just kind of I have no idea what I'm going to do with this when I'm done. And then one thing, led to another. And so that's, when you talk about things like doing what you love or finding your vocation, that's one of the things I kind of recommend to people is say, look, sometimes it's not a straight line. Sometimes you're going to go up and back and things like that.
Okay. And do you find, you mentioned earlier, the spiritual side of it? Obviously, a lot of people speak to coaches and mentors and hire them, obviously, to help them in their career or even in their daily lives. Do you think the spiritual side
gives a different aspect to it, or is it just something additional, or is it completely different? You know, this is for me because I don't understand fully.
Yeah, no, that actually, this is the biggest question mark I have in the work that I do is that's a really tricky question because everybody defines spirituality so differently. And so you have to decide, first of all, what that word's going to mean to you. Because whenever I was doing research on the word, what it basically said, you know, in a nutshell, was that it's based from the word inspire and breath. And so basically the way I look at it is with every breath you take, you get to choose who you're going to be as a person, how you're going to connect to other people, and how you're going to connect to the world.
Yeah.
And so if you go by that definition of spirituality, then, you know, it opens up all the doors for anything you want to build on that foundation. And that could be religion, how you treat people, how you run your business, all of those things have that core element of how do I want to connect myself and other people. And it also goes into things like critical thinking skills, emotional intelligence, binary thinking, all those things are interrelated. So when you start talking about that, you're really talking about any of those topics. So pick one.
Okay. And I suppose, I suppose the natural thing, without trying to make you feel uncomfortable here, is when people talk about the coaching and the spirituality, etc. Have you ever found that to be for certain individuals, say, hey, you know, I'm not spiritual, I don't go to church, I don't believe in God, or whatever. Do you find that that's something that they back away from when they hear that, or are they open and receptive to that?
Well, it's interesting because if you look at the whole continuum of the 20 years, when I first started, it was like I would never mention that word because people would think religion or they would think crystals. And so you could go, you know, either way with that. And so I kind of came up with a way of talking about it in relation to human potential. And so, you know, if you're going to talk about spirituality, so many times we hear about it from the religious perspective, which there is that discussion, but you can also talk about spirituality from the perspective of, you know, what are we going to do with ourselves in the world? You know, how are we going to, as human beings, interconnect everything so that we are taking care of ourselves, taking care of other people. And, you know, if we choose not to do that, we're fracturing things. So everything we're doing has an impact. I like to use the analogy of the butterfly effect, which I don't know if you're familiar with that, but basically the short version of it is if a butterfly flaps its wings in one faraway country, it can impact the weather patterns going into another whole other country. And so little things that happen like in London or in England are going to impact things in the United States. And so, you know, if we're thinking from that broader perspective, we're thinking about how we're going to connect. And so I think with businesses, that's the challenge they have because, you know, obviously their number one focus is let's make money. That's the most of the purposes of most businesses. So now you have to ask yourself the question, how do I want to make the money? And how do I want to make a place that people can come to work every day and be more efficient and think more critically and, you know, care about what they're doing, because they've done study after study that shows that people that are happy and love their jobs are the best advocates for your company and also are more efficient and more effective at their work. So why would you not want that? You know?
Totally agree. Totally agree. I think that plays nicely into what we spoke about a number of weeks back. If we look at age diversity, which clearly we're going to be talking a little bit about Age Diversity Network, I think how you've described people understanding more about themselves, what they offer, looking within, and how they treat others. As a diversity issue, obviously there are many out there, but we're specifically focusing on the age side. How do you think that that's something that will help, for instance, older workers who are either struggling to find work, are struggling in the workplace because they either feel excluded because of their age, or they're not part of the party gang, or whatever. Do you have people that fall into that sphere, who are sort of coming to you and saying, look, can we sort of book a session? Can you help out somehow? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I actually wrote an article on it. And one of the things that I find interesting is when we're talking about diversity, it really, even age diversity, ethnic diversity, financial diversity, all of those things, and when you're talking about this, how do you connect to yourself, all are very ingrained. And so anything that I would say to somebody who was working on their, with more age issues than ethnic issues and all, I would really kind of tell them the same thing. And basically, the way I start things, just to kind of give you a feel for where I go with this, and this will help people who are listening because they'll be able to actually start thinking about it in terms of this perspective, is the first, there's three things that I try to teach people. And this is a skill set, and it also helps with critical thinking skills, which I think helps all age groups. Is you have to, first of all, kind of know who you are as a person. And when I say that, I mean behaviorally. Are you a friendly person? Are you helpful? Are you kind? Because that becomes the premise for how you do everything that you do. Yeah. So if you're if you have age issue, if you're in an age place like we are, kind of, we're kind of on the tail end of the workplace. You have to think of it in terms of, okay, regardless of what I'm going to do out there, I need to be kind, or I need to be friendly, or whatever word I'm picking, because that helps you keep your focus so that you don't start getting the attitude of, oh, I'm old, oh, I can't do that, oh, people are going to discriminate with me. If that stuff becomes your focus, then you're never going to truly get to where you want to go, because you're focused on you're taking your energy somewhere that's not taking you to that core place where you want to start. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then once you pick those words, then you're going to make your actions match that. So if you go out and you're looking for jobs, you have to think in terms of, okay, what do I really want to do? What's my vocation? Do I want to stay in the same career field? Do I want to go in a different one? And do that exploration. But all the time you're doing that exploration, you want to be thinking, okay, no matter what happens, I need to stay behaviorally in this place that I want to be, because that's what's going to keep me on the line and focused to where I want to end up ultimately. Otherwise, it's very easy to get distracted. Yeah, so sure. Words and actions. Yeah, so your personal intentional mission statement, that's what I call it. And then making sure your words and your actions match. So anytime you talk to somebody, keep it at that behavioral level, because that helps keep you centered and focused on moving your plan forward. So you're kind of doing two things at once. And the last one, which is really hard to do, it sounds easy when I say it, but this is probably the one that people have the most trouble with, is not to judge things as good or bad or wrong or right. Yeah. Okay. Things can be different, but if you start placing value on things based off of your value system, it's always going to end in discrimination or somebody getting upset or things like that, because you're placing your value system on somebody else, and they may have a totally different one that's just as valid, but you've got to kind of figure out how to integrate them. And we actually talked about that The Intern, the movie The Intern.
Yes, yes.
I love that example, because if you saw him, he stayed very centered. His words and his actions matched. He kept moving forward, and he built a relationship with people. And so to me, that's kind of that the advice I would go is go out there and start looking for what you want, but use this model to kind of make it your center point, your foundational point.
Sure. So that's the positive mindset for individuals, and helping them to understand how they need to be to push through and get to where they want to be. If I flip that over and say you've got organizations who, to use the want of a quite a common phrase at the moment, unconscious bias, in terms of their recruitment, and an older worker feels that they're just not getting anywhere with that. Often organizations suffer the same issue, which is they don't know how to work with individuals. They don't know how to behave. And often, I think, it's fair to say, not everyone, because that would be unfair to say that, but often they may look down on people and feel more superior because they're in the hiring position. they're the ones who have the ultimate say, I suppose, and the candidate are the ones who are saying, please let it be me, type of thing. So it puts them in a bit of strength. So do you feel, though, that with organizations, I personally do, but this is to you, in terms of their perception of the older workers and how they behave and what they could do to change their understanding and recruitment practices, or showing more empathy, or whatever. I mean, have you come across organizations where you've had to work with them to try and get them to understand that more?
Yeah, you know, I agree with you 100%. I think it's a real challenge because, you know, the workforce is changing so much. I mean, we've got the millennials coming in who are the biggest workforce right now, you know, kind of the biggest area. And they view the world a little bit differently just because, you know, we were raised on typewriters, they were raised on computers. So their you know, their picture of the world is a little bit different. And so to me, I think it is a big challenge for the kind of the older population is how do I take these skills that I have in this work that I can do and integrate it into something that's either moving more towards younger population, or, you know, things that are more technical than I possibly did in the past. One of the things I really recommend they do is, you know, in this day and age, technology is such a huge part of our the way that we do things, that it never hurts if you're, you know, kind of wanting to get back into the workforce to get very skilled at the more technical things. So if you want, you know, if you're saying, okay, I really want to get back into work, well, okay, what do you know, what kind of work do you want to do? And kind of figuring it out for yourself. And it's interesting though, because you're going to run into a lot of roadblocks. I mean, people, you know, people are, I think, sometimes very nervous about being around people that aren't exactly like them or the same as them, because then it challenges their belief systems, it challenges their values and things like that. And so you have to find a way to kind of integrate yourself into that without giving up who you are, but still finding that right fit, because, you know, people have different skill sets. So I don't think it's a one size fits all for the older generation. I think you have to kind of navigate where it's going to be and advocate, you know, for yourself, because it's always difficult to get in. You know, everybody could say, well, you know, I have this challenge or this challenge. How am I going to navigate that? But I have found almost very, very much so that people who stay focused on that model tend to get further along, just because if you're going in with an attitude of I'm mad because I'm older and nobody will hire me. Well, you know, if you were a employer, how would you, you know, who would you pick? The guy who was, you know, kind of says, here's my model, here's what I'm using. I'm, you know, I want to be a friendly person or an efficient person in work, and here's my skills and here's what I can do. Or would you want to hire the person that says, well, you know, I can't get a job because I'm older and therefore I'm being discriminated against, you know? Even though it may be true that you're being discriminated against, but you can feel just from talking about it how different that feels, and imagine what that impact could have on the people that are going out and trying to find the work, you know, and saying, okay, what do I need? And asking the question, you know, if you go to an interview and they don't get you the job, you know, asking them, say, hey, you know, I'm trying to learn from these interviews. What is it that you know, what skill set don't I have that you think would be good for me to have, or what, you know, what do you think I should do to do that? Because that's one thing I do see with the younger population. I have daughters that are in their 20s, and one of them just turned 30. And so they're kind of in that millennial generation, and it's very interactive with emailing and texting and things like that between HR when they're looking for jobs. And they're not afraid to go in and ask the question, you know, what could I do more? And I think, you know, we had a different set of rules for how to do human resources when we were going through. So, you know, kind of figuring out what the new rules are for that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a very valid point in terms of if people are open to understanding what, if we can call them weaknesses, what their weaknesses were or are, or what is it I don't have that you're looking for, and I can work on it, whether that be a personal trait or whether it be a particular skill. again, a personal skill or a technical skill of some sort, or knowledge of something. I think where a lot of the organizations tend to let themselves down is the lack of feedback, and that can be for many reasons, as we know. It could be the sheer volume of candidates that they receive CVs for any given role, or it could just be that that's not how they operate, which, you know, if that is the latter, then that's not very good. But I think that that's a good piece of advice for people to sort of try and understand, if they weren't successful, why they weren't successful. But I think also organizations have a lot to learn as well. I think
very much so, yeah.
They deal with the older workers, and their handling of situations, and trying to sort of, it's difficult, I get it, because of the sheer volume, but I think there is still a little bit of movement that could be made within the organizations to sort of try and put themselves in the candidate's shoes. I
totally agree with you. Yeah, I think, in fact, I think that's probably the majority of businesses. You know, anytime you're trying to change something, you know, to me, the big thing they can do is go look for companies, you know, go just look online and say companies that support you know, the older generations for jobs, and then go apply to those jobs, because those are the ones where they're going to probably find more success. And to me, if those companies start showing success with integrating that older population in, then it becomes kind of a mainstream over time. You know, it's kind of like the work I do is, you know, it's not going to happen overnight. No. And although it'd be great, yeah, if everybody would do it, but businesses are very, you know, kind of focused on the money and the, you know, getting the stuff done that they want to get done. And what they're not recognizing, and this is I think the $1 million question is, how do you get companies to see the value of that? Because so many of them say that it's valuable, but they don't do it. And so, in fact, I wish I could remember it. I don't have it right in front of me, but I can see if I can hunt it down. But a couple of years ago, there was a study done where they asked managers and leaders, you know, is employee engagement and culture important in the workplace? And 70% of them said yes. But when asked the question, you know, do you do something to support that? 30% of them said, 30% of them said yes. They did. So that meant that 70%, you know, if 70% of the people are saying it's important, but then only 30% of them are doing it, then you can see right there the great divide. And, you know, if you think about it, people who value how they behave and how they treat people, they're probably going to be more inclusive and more diverse, because they recognize the value of having those different sets of knowledge. But, you know, that's how do you change a company and make them want that to be important is, you know, kind of the question.
I think I've spoken to quite a large number of companies who have their own diversity and inclusion department. And it's quite interesting, because I think, like anything, a lot of what people do comes down to the individuals who are doing that. And what I mean by that, quite frankly, is that you've got people who may be in a senior position in diversity and inclusion that just happen to fall into that because they worked within HR or something. You know, that I'm not trying to generalize here, but they sort of found themselves in that type of role. And you've got others that truly believe what they're doing is the right thing. So it's the difference between the old box ticking exercise versus actually really caring and understanding what you're trying to do. So it's not for me a position of having to reach certain targets and you can then go back and report. The difference for me is you've got people in an organization who are doing a particular job, who either really believe what they're doing is good for the benefit of the organization, they're pouring their heart and soul into it, and they're making a difference and adding value to others, versus people that are just climbing up a corporate ladder, having a senior position, ticking the boxes, reporting back. We've reached our target. We've reached our KPIs, however they get measured. And as far as they're concerned, that's a good thing, because their target may have been, we need to increase our ethnic minority hiring by X%. We need to hire another 10% more women than we have done in the last 6 months, and so on, etc. And I think it's if people are doing that and saying, yes, we've done it, and that's it, and nothing is then done after that, which is how do we actually interact with these people? How do we encompass what they're bringing to the table as the overall and overarching real difference that they want to make, and the company wants to get out of them, and working together. And I think if you look at the organizations, and I've worked with a few of them, unfortunately, which don't operate in that sense, and it literally is we've hit a target, and I can report back to my boss because I told him that's what we were going to do. Great job done. It's very, very difficult to know which companies, unless you've either dealt with them or actually worked for them, it's difficult to know which companies really take these things seriously and which ones don't. And that's the hard part, I think, for a lot of the issues that we see in our day-to-day working lives, and trying to help people that are suffering from age diversity. It's difficult to prove, as we know as well. But I think when you get organisations that are literally just doing it to toe the party line, to report back to the ethics committee if they have one within the organisation, and they can say, here's our graph, look at all of these lines, they're going up.
We've attained all our goals.
Absolutely. And that's the difficult part, because I have spoken to a number of people, and they're not really committed to the cause, let's put it that way. And that's really, really hard to deal with, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because you've got, HR is a lot like, pretty much all the companies out there. They're very diverse. And I agree with you. There's some people out there who are just, they've got it, they figured it out. They're doing not only the HR administrative stuff, but they're also in charge of the culture and really embracing that. In fact, I spoke to a group of HR people recently, and it was kind of an interesting conversation, because there's a lot of them that really would like to kind of change the way that HR is structured, but their hands are tied, because, if you think about it, you see on Glassdoor and Indeed and all of those, sometimes they have these new jobs where it's kind of like a people and culture person. But when you look at what the job requirements are, is it's mostly administrative stuff. So what if your HR company was not only responsible for the administrative stuff, but also making sure that they knew, how the culture was going together? And it's kind of a challenge, only in that it's harder to measure, because it's more of a, what a lot of people call soft skill. And so I think that's a real challenge for the HR people, because they're kind of stuck between the people who are making the decisions and the people who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And so, how do you enable them to be able to more accurately and more effectively change not only the dynamics of the administrative and the HR, but also the culture, the engagement? Because right now, that's the big thing I see, is most companies do not have something in place that does the culture and the engagement. Like the work that I do, whenever I go into a company, I'm working on, in fact, it's funny, because right now, since this is kind of a newer, it's parallel to stuff, but I have a lady I've been working with. She's a president and owner of a mortgage company. And whenever she introduces me, she says, it's really hard to say what you do. So she said, so I kind of just let you, work with them, because I can't really describe it. And so I've tried many different names. And ironically, I came up with people and culture person. And then all of a sudden it started becoming an HR thing. And so I thought, okay, so what if we could really make HR be something where they were doing what I'm doing, where it is about, okay, how do we make sure that if there's a conflict between somebody, we're not just sticking a Band-Aid on it and saying, okay, let's do that. And, you know, what I kind of train people to say is think of your company as 2 layers.
Yeah.
The one layer is your business you do, and all of the things that you have to do on a day-to-day basis, make money, but then you also have that foundational one. And I think when we talked last time, I used the example of a tree. I think that's what I said was, if you think about a tree, you know, the trunk and the leaves and the branches and all are all the business, you know, the day-to-day stuff, the things you have to get done if you're a project manager, the projects you're taking care of and things like that. But the only way that tree stays foundationally strong is if the roots are really strong. And so if that HR person was thinking in terms of, okay, I need to make all these people as strong as I can because that's what is foundationally going to keep this company together, then it really doesn't matter how old you are. You know, you can be, because I think if I talk a lot with younger people too, and they have ageism on the other side, you know, you're 25, you're too young to know anything.
Sure.
So, you know, they're kind of on the flip side of where us aging people are. And so I think, you know, to me, we've got to figure out a way to make it so that companies can really understand and embrace that if they have strong roots, regardless of what the age is, that's going to impact. I mean, you can think about it just visually, what it's going to look like in your company, you know, and imagine what that looks like if you put that into action. And HR people, I think there's a lot of them out there who would love to be able to try to do that, but they don't train it. It's not a skill that's really been trained a lot. In fact, that's probably the number one thing I hear is, you know, why has nobody ever taught us this before? Because it's not something that's really mainstreamed yet, is how do you do that?
I think with HR, it doesn't matter what industry or profession people are in, there's good and bad, but generally I think, you know, they find themselves in a bit of a tough place because they, on the one hand, of course, they need to protect the organization to a certain degree, but also from an employee perspective, they need to be not just putting together and making sure that everyone's conforming to the rules and regulations and legislation, etc., but also looking after the welfare of employees. And I often think that with HR, they in the years gone past, they used to be two departments really. There was personnel, wasn't there, and there was HR. And personnel, their job was to make sure that everyone was paid on time, payroll was run, the hiring, gathering of CVs, etc. And HR was literally human resources to sort of try and take care of the softer things. But now it all sort of seems to have been wrapped into one. And I think if HR are trying to do the right thing, at the end of the day, it really is down to the masters of the organization, because they are the ones that are going to control it. And I think they probably are in a difficult situation at times, because they, on the one hand, want to and know they should be helping certain things, and on the other hand, maybe they can't, because the organization either doesn't allow them, or they think it will do them some sort of damage. Therefore, they'll direct HR what they want them to do. HR will stay within the confines of the law and legislation as usual. But so I think it's a tough job for them. But again, getting back to what I said earlier, I think it needs strong people and people that really believe in what needs to be done to try and push that through and try and make a change. And it would be interesting to see what the next 5 years or so brings in terms of diversity and inclusion, because it's been out there a while now, and there's lots of organizations who have now formed their own internal department called that, whether they're part of HR or not. Some are, some aren't, I think. I don't know whether there's a specific route that they feel they need to take, but to me, I think diversity and inclusion, if HR are not really doing or being allowed to take care of employees in a mindful way, then to me, diversity and inclusion needs to be a separate entity within an organization. They need to run, personally, again, that's just my opinion, if they could run autonomously, then they're not guided by what HR say they want to see happen, what the top of the tree says they want to see happen. They're actually doing it because they know what should be done, and then they can be guided for sure in terms of legislation, etc., and make sure they're working within those. But I think in terms of the human side of it, they to me, it would be good to see that they would have some sort of leeway to sort of do what's right. It all sounds airy fairy, and I don't mean it to sound that way, but
no, I know. I hear this. I hear what you're saying. In fact, I hear it quite a bit. I mean, that's the thing I find probably the most surprising is how many people have voiced that same story over and over. Yeah, I mean, it's. I don't think it's something that's unique. I think it's really a real challenge that we have as far as businesses are concerned, because it does impact mental, to me, if I'm talking from my perspective, which is the interconnectedness of things.
Yeah.
So if business is connected to people, which is connected to mental health, which is connected to ageism, which just a side note, when you were talking, is one of the other things that I think people have to recognize is that people are growing older and older and staying healthier longer.
Yep.
And so I think that's one of the big things that has to be changed as far as a perspective is, back in the day when you were hit a certain age, 65, you retired, you were done, but people are working later and later, the older, we know a number of people who are in their mid 70s going into their late 70s who are working very effectively doing, very kind of high technical jobs, and they're just fine. So I think it's out there, but going back to what I was talking about earlier, it just, I think we have to figure out a way to decide as a society how we're going to be interconnected. And it's different now than it was because, 5-10 years ago, we would have never been having this conversation because, London and the United States or Texas were not really easy to get connected to.
Yeah.
And now, we're not only looking at how do we do it for the United States, but how do we globalize it, and it's going faster. So, because with technology, we're moving faster, we're getting broader, bigger, more cultures, more ways of looking at the world. How do you slow everything down enough to say, wow, this really matters, that you and I can connect with each other on a level where we can respect each other and bring something positive and well into the world, as opposed to fracturing it.
Yeah.
And the example I use is, fracture, when you're talking about fracturing versus healing, it's as simple as if you're going through your workday and you smile at somebody. I mean, imagine the impact of one smile at somebody, because you never know. They may be having a good day, a bad day, and imagine what that one small gesture, if it can do that much, what would a business or a company look like if it recognized the value of those small gestures to make it, whether you're talking ageism or any of those things, because
it's very true.
It'd be great if a company could say, okay, it doesn't matter how old you are. Do you have the skill set? Can you do what we need you to? Are you trainable? Here's a program we could put you in. And because I know one of the things I think we talked about was I was doing some research on it when I was writing the article, and there are some companies that actually have intern programs. So when you retire, you can go into an intern program where they do training so that they can hire some of the older generation. But those are incredibly few and far between. I mean, those are the trendsetters that are out there starting to see, oh, hey, people are living longer. And we've got these people with these wonderful skill sets and all this knowledge that we could put to work because they're still healthy and able to do things that they maybe wouldn't have done 20 years ago because our health, declined much faster. So
no, absolutely.
So how do you make it mainstream? That's the $1 million question, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on it also, that people are working longer. Certainly in the UK, the retirement age has been extended. It used to be years ago 60 years old for women, 65 for men. Now they've equalised that, and it's 66 for men and for women, and that's going to be going up to 68 in the future as well. So I think there are people that will be working longer. So
Exactly,
there are
yeah.
going to be people that are out there that are older,
Yeah.
that either want to work, or, to be fair, in some cases have to
Yeah.
work. You know, they're not
Exactly,
necessarily
yeah.
financially stable enough to say, yes, I can retire. They may not be
Right.
able to afford to. But anyway,
Yeah.
so that's really useful. I think, to sort of try and close this off, because we're not running out of time, but we're extending it. What would be the best piece of advice that someone has given you, and also what would you say is the best piece of advice, or the most important piece of advice that you've given to others? So two questions in one there.
Oh, you know, I've had this question before, and I think every time I get asked it, I change my answer.
Okay.
Because, you know, that it's really, really difficult to kind of put it down into just one thing. But I'll tell you, the one thing I have found that does more than anything else in the world that I have found is making sure your words and actions match. Because when you do that, you're staying true to who you are as a person, authenticity. You're
Yeah.
building trust, because people know that when you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. And whenever you take that and you say, okay, I want to have this career, or this is where I want to go, or now that I'm older, I want to go here. If you just talk about it, or get upset about it, or don't do something about it, you're never going to feel fulfilled. But
No.
if you go try to do it, even if you don't succeed, at least then you can say, okay, here were my words, here are my actions. I can at least say that I did what I wanted to do, and I did my best, and I tried for everything. Or you might get the dream job and it work out great.
Yeah.
And then I would add a side note: research. I'm a firm believer that if you want something, you have to go out there and find the reality of it. You know, my whole thing is expectations, reality. And where that came from was, I had a counselor friend of mine once tell me, the further away from reality your expectations are, the more distressed you will become. And so if you're believing something that's not true, then it's going to cause you more distress.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you got to go out and figure out what it is that's truth. And the only way sometimes to find truth is to go out there and research and say, okay, I want to do this job. So I'm going to find out everything I can, and everything, you know, what skills do I have to have? Who's the best at doing it right now? What companies are accepting the older population? Anything that you can find, and using that information to take you forward with your actions.
Yeah.
So those are my two grains of information that I would say that I find that are my defaults whenever I'm kind of going, oh, okay, what am I doing?
Okay.
So,
Okay, that's fantastic. No, thank you for that. My final question then would be, what would you say, either on a personal level or a business level, is your best achievement? Now I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but that's
no. Yeah, well, I will say this. I say, whenever I first started doing this, I really honestly had no clue what I was going to do. It was kind of I feel like this is what I need to do, and therefore I'm going to go do it, and I'm going to hope it turns into something. But I did know that one of the things that I wanted to do was try to help people not feel so afraid and angry and hostile. I saw so many people who were just, oh, I'm so mad about this, or oh, I'm so upset about this. And I thought, okay, how can you channel all that energy that somebody has and turn it into something that's healthy and building and strengthening, whether it be for the person, for the team, for the organization. So I would say that's probably what I would consider my biggest accomplishment, personally and professionally, is being able to hear people say to me, I can't believe that I've never learned this. And it's something you can't describe until you do it, until you can embrace that way of viewing the world, but it changes everything. So I would say that's probably my biggest accomplishment, is every person that I've done or company I've worked with who has been able to say that. So,
excellent. No, that's a great answer. That's a great answer. Apologise for the noise there. That's
no, you're good.
My automated timer.
We have so many things that go off.
Oh,
I
my
know.
goodness.
I have to make sure everything's turned off whenever I come. Yeah, I don't know if you could hear my ding, but I've got a
I can, but that's not
alert.
a problem.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know if it was going through on your side, but I have an alert that's on my computer whenever I get a message, and it kept dinging, and I was like, oh, I hope that's not going through on that side.
I know.
So.
One of those things, unfortunately. Anyway, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show today. Dr. Lynette Reed, everyone. Hopefully you've enjoyed what Lynette has talked about. The final thing, just to close off, Lynette, is if people want to contact you about your services, if they feel that you can help, whether it be individuals or corporations, what's the best way for them to be able to do that?
There's two ways. One is you can go to my website, and actually on my website is a resource center. You can put your name in, and it'll put you into a resource center that kind of gets you started on some of the things I work with. And so the website is www.expectations with an S on the end to the number 2 reality.com. So expectations to number 2 reality.com, or you can message me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so that's another good way to get in touch with me. So those are
fantastic. Okay, no, that's wonderful. So I think for anyone listening, hopefully you've captured all of that. But I will repeat it. It's expectations, the number 2 reality.com, and I think, as Lynette has said, you can also reach her via LinkedIn. For any of those watching, you'll have the advantage because it will be appearing on the screen. So that will make it easier.
It makes it easier, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But Lynette, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully people have gained something out of this. And I look forward to catching up with you in the near future to have an offline chat. So thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it.
If you would like to find out more about the Age Diversity Network and how we can help individuals and how we work with organisations with training and courses, then please do visit our website www.agediversitynetwork.com or visit our page on LinkedIn and join in any conversations or contact us via that link. Thank you.